For those of you that are here, I had the honor of meeting Maggie, 3 years ago, I think.
Yeah, 3 or 4.
And so in that process, we met each other through the conversation around autoethnography. And so, jumping right into her work, Dr. Berg's book uses Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, not just as a theoretical lens, but as a structural scaffold for an autoethnographic inquiry. Maggie's a 30-year English teacher whose body crossed geopolitical and cultural borders from Slavic soil to the United States, and who carried that crossing into her scholarship, bringing the intimacy of classroom practitioner and the critical eye of a feminist researcher. Dr. Berg chose to revisit and reconceptualize a landmark 1970 text by Bronfenbrenner himself, written before he had fully articulated the ecological theory that the book would inspire, creating a recursive loop of his experience leading to his theory, and then Dr. Berg's experience reading through his theory. Macro level cultural systems, both Soviet and American educational ideology, inscribe themselves on an individual teacher's body and practice is one that this autoethnographer, Dr. Berg, is uniquely equipped to take seriously. So I appreciate that I had the opportunity to read what she has to offer today. And her abstract includes a feminist autoethnography of language education and childhood on Slavic soil and stateside, replicates and offers a fresh reconceptualization of the 1970 comparative education book, Two Worlds of Childhood, U.S. and U.S.S.R., researched and written by Urie Bronfenbrenner, who later drew on the experiences to propose a comprehensive framework on human development. Bronfenbrenner's Ecological System Theory, BEST, published in 1979. BEST situates the human at the center of our four systems of a social environment where the highest level of culture or macro system affects all lower levels down to the individual person, but where the lower levels can also influence higher levels. This interplay between culture and person lies at the heart of autoethnography, and in this book, the author, an English teacher of 30 years, applies this framework to her experience preparing future leaders of the English language in a Northwestern Russian university. This book will appeal to scholars and researchers with interest in comparative and international education, literacy, education, and autoethnography. That is a mouthful. And I would also like to offer, for those who are ready to read, there are surprise um, uh, noticings of Jane Goodall. Prince makes an appearance. James Bond makes an appearance, and Control Top Pantyhose as well. So it's true. So with that, our dearest Maggie, Bronfenbrenner's original book emerged from his own personal experience as a child of Russian immigrants, studying American and Soviet childhood side by side. You're revisiting his work from inside one of those worlds. Can you share a bit about the best comprehensive framework that was a catalyst for your research?
Yeah, so BEST has become, it was when I originally did my teacher education, it wasn't in the basic educational psychology textbook at that time. Now it's pretty common. If you open an educational psychology textbook, you'll run into Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. And um, my coming to Russian and Ukraine was very kind of I didn't study. I wasn't like a Slavic studies major in college. I joined the Peace Corps, right? And I mentioned this in the book that one of the reasons I joined the Peace Corps is I was raised by parents who argued that you have to serve. Your government provides a free education for you. At that time, we didn't have testing all the time like now, where you're giving data to a system all the time. So I kind of agreed with them that I was so lucky to get this education and I should serve in some way. So Peace Corps was my choice. And it was also driven by the fact that the wall had fallen and we had been raised with this propaganda of this is the enemy, and I wanted to kind of deprogram. And so there was all this, like we were actually disarming at that time in history, taking apart bombs, right? And it was just a very optimistic period in like the early 90s. And I was like, I'm going to join Peace Corps. I can serve in that way. And I had been trained to be an English teacher, so I went over to teach English. And so I was taught Ukrainian for 6 intensive weeks. And then I was assigned to an ethnic Russian city in the new nation of Ukraine. I'm like, oh, I was really angry. I went back. I was like, look, I need to eat. I need to be able to find a bathroom in a public place. I need some Russian. So can you please teach me some Russian? So I got like 1 week of intensive Russian. And then after that, it was, tutor study, independent study, and that kind of thing. So it was very happenstance that I had this opportunity to experience these Slavic speaking nations. Um, what was the question again? Sorry, I got going there.
And I've muted myself so that you can talk clearly. Let's see. I was just asking a little bit about the comprehensive framework that kind of led you into this research. And so I think that kind of gave us the foundation of how you got here. So you cite this throughout your writing, and you mention just that flavor of around the feminist autoethnographic work in general. And as women, that layer of not only with autoethnographic work, but in a female body, that idea of how what we're working on becomes our private work becomes public and our personal becomes political. And your research question for your book was, I believe, how would Bronfenbrenner's comparative study of the US and USSR differ if his 1979 framework were applied? Go ahead, if you wanted to add something in there.
Yeah, no, so my happenstance, so I had not learned this framework. And then later when I went back to get my PhD and I ran into undergraduates, it was in their textbooks. And I was like, um, and I was reading this comparative education thing, a general book on how do you do comparative education. And they said Bronfenbrenner is a great place to start because you can study at different levels.
Mhm.
So I'm kind of like, oh wait. I start looking into his history. I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy is, part of the his family left before the revolution. So he had a very fascinating history in himself that his parents had left this area and then they came back.
Mhm.
And so I was like, this guy is really interesting. And wound up um reading his book, but what's this idea that the private is political,
Mhm.
right? He had 5 kids, right? He had 5 kids. And here he's writing this paradigm that everyone is pulling from in education now. And when you read his work, it's as if those children never existed. Like they do appear like once or twice as anecdotes in
Mhm.
this comparative study where he appears to take his daughter and his wife and his child, his son, at least once to the Soviet Union. Because I could find one story like that in his comparative education. I was like, yeah, but this is all about kids. Like, this is an
Mhm.
adult perspective on kids. And so I thought I had a really unique opportunity to kind of look at it from let my daughter drive the study. Like, I made sure that she could learn Russian and then when I went back, because I went up marrying a Russian, you
Mhm.
know, and I went back into the country. I'm like, let me just watch it from a grassroots. Let me approach this from a grassroots. Let's look at her, put her in a school and see what happens. Like, you know, how does this study differ in that way as well?
Right. And then within that, for yourself in your own location as a woman, as a teacher, with a partner and a daughter, um, thinking through both sides of what you're looking at for yourself and then having your daughter drive the study, what were you hoping or what do you feel like you were able to it, launch this research around that maybe you could see something that he couldn't in his best research up to this point?
Mm. That's a great question. And I don't know that I was looking for something that he couldn't see. So there's a writer, Sarah Ahmed, who
Mhm.
talks about queer phenomenology, right?
Mhm.
And that for women, um, our families are central to who we are. And I was more so informed by that idea that this is, who we are. So I don't necessarily know that I was like, he can't do this as much
Mhm.
as what can I do?
Right. To extend, expand.
Yeah. So what is it that about, you know, um, our families and how they come into being that Sarah Ahmed talks about and that, that will reveal something to me, right? And it reveals several things. I mean, when you read that book, there's tons of places where it's just questions where
Yeah.
when I'm just questioning what's going on here? Why am I feeling this? Yeah.
And as I read, it felt conversational to me that you were talking to me as a reader. I could hear you. I could see you in these circumstances as you were describing everything from being in your daughter's school or the gray men who was following and what the watchers and just and feeling your kind of that combination of um fear and curiosity and how to navigate the space that you're in with dignity and respect for the structures that as I think as you were told when you came into Russia to start this experience, don't do anything stupid.
Yeah.
And just being cautious and careful, while also trying to be free and open to receive what your daughter might share with you in a culture and climate that is not your everyday experience. So I enjoyed listening and reading and hearing your voice in that. I wanted to, I don't know if you, before we get into kind of how you laid out your story, that was one of the most interesting pieces for me was a trifecta of your daughter's story, um, mentioning designing it by the structure of the month. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how you came to that design because there's several layers to that. It's very complicated, but it's very beautiful. And I wanted to read an example, if I may. Are you okay with me reading some in
Yes,
front of
please
you?
do.
I wanted to read, for example, you open each chapter with a title that's taken from a Ukrainian month, including a notion of native flora, vegetation, which creates kind of a sensory and ecological specificity that's doing more than decoration for your story. It's locating you and your daughter in a particular landscape and your husband, your partners, and your co-teacher as well, Olga, I believe. For you, how does that botanical layer that you added to start every chapter um, relate to Bronfenbrenner's ecological metaphor? So I'll read an example. This is from your chapter 4. It begins, this is in October. You call it golden. Could you say that for me in Russian? I don't want to.
I have to see it to say it. I don't
Here,
know
here
off
you
the
go.
top of my.
Here you go. Can you see it?
Jovtin.
Thank you. All right, October, feminist interpretive autoethnography. So this is an example of what you do in every chapter, which I adore. Thin-leaved birch trees change from a medium green to a bright golden color in the autumn. Birch trees, regarded as a pioneer species, quickly reestablish in an ecosystem after a forest fire. Folklore maintains that a red ribbon tied around the black, knotted, and silvery white trunk wards off evil. Artisans in Russia and Ukraine craft and carve the bark with intricate patterns and scenes to create beautiful bookmarks, boxes, clock faces, tea trays, and other items for the home. The birch's versatile wood can be manufactured into everything from toothpicks to fine furniture. The living tree is tapped for its mildly sweet juice, and the branches are often trimmed, bundled, and whipped against a human body in banya to stimulate the surface of the skin in the steam bath ritual. So tell us a little bit more about how that ecological piece and that botanical layer related to Bronfenbrenner's ecological metaphor as a part of his best research.
Okay, first I want to talk about the writing process
Yes.
because you hear this all the time and it's really true. Trust the process, trust the
Mhm.
process. So my sister, when I was having difficulty writing, my sister was like, just write, don't edit. Carolyn Ellis, Botchner, they
Mhm.
all say the same thing, write, don't edit. That's after. So I started writing, I started writing, I started writing, and then I realized every time I enter a new chapter, I have these sensory, having lived there for over 6 years, I have this sensory knowledge of like the colors and the smells that are there. And I was found myself that would bring me into the space again as I wrote. And then after a while, I started thinking of my early at the like I said, when I joined Peace Corps, I got 6 weeks intensive Ukrainian language. It brought to mind the Ukrainian calendar. So I'm like, wait a minute. The Ukrainians tell us this will happen in this month,
Mm.
right? And
Hmm.
so I went back to those textbooks and I found the calendar. I'm like, there it is. And so it naturally emerged from the process, right? They just got matched up. It's like, oh,
Hmm.
okay, here
Yes.
we go. So what I found fascinating, and this is kind of, it took me a long time to realize this. And I guess if I had been more of a student of anthropology, I would have already known this. But the sense of relationship with the natural world is very different.
How
And
so?
in the United States, and I've written the first kind of autoethnographic piece I wrote actually brought this up, is that when I tried to import Russian textbooks into American schools, because we have one of the few Russian immersion schools in the United States for children here, is that they have a higher regard for the rights of beings and nature within their curriculum. And I compared that to the scientific texts of what are taught in English, in the English language. And it was all about managing resources, that
Mm.
nature is for us to use, and we manage it. And when my daughter began to translate the poems that are in the book from Russian into English, all of them, almost all of them, not all of them, were about nature, right? So it's very inherent in the curriculum. They start them from very early age, gaining this poetry to talk about the beauty of the nature around them. And I went back to, so then you go back to the Bronfenbrenner study that I'm kind of trying to replicate. And there's images of children outside of the school context, um, by the lake, and they've built little boats and they're going to push them out onto the water, and moving snow so people can walk on the sidewalk. They had kindergartners like moving snow. But at the same time, what a great sensory experience, the weight of snow at the front of a
Mm.
shovel as you push it, right? And move it to the side. And they're doing this to little kids, like two of them on a shovel. Let's do this, right? And but he never analyzes those photos. He never discusses those photos and what's the significance of that. And I'm like, I have never seen like American school children out shoveling snow so people could come into their school. But I think it's fascinating. So again and again and again and again, that I ran into um this unspoken appreciation for nature that is evidenced in Bronfenbrenner's study, but he never talks about it. It's as if he doesn't see it either. He's blind to
Mm.
it as well, right? And then I started pulling in a lot of the eco-linguists, and they're all saying like, we need more people to learn how to understand nature as something that's contemplative in of itself. We don't have to be present for this to exist. This is a very powerful, wonderful, and beautiful part of having life, is the natural world. And it's again and again, it kept showing itself in the curriculum that my daughter was bringing home, and Bronfenbrenner's like photos. And he mentions a few things. He actually mentions he provides a chart of curriculum, and it's right there in the curriculum itself. But he never talks about it. So he got fascinated with ideas of like governance, like the
Mhm.
children coming in and if another child had violated a rule, how are we going to talk to that child to modify that behavior as a group, right? He got really fascinated with sense of self-governance or, and group governance instead of, to me, what kind of emerged from what my daughter was going through was this high regard and respect for the natural world.
Mhm. Yeah.
So that would be the big expansion, I guess.
Mhm. And I think it's something that you saw that he may have not.
Or
It's unique.
maybe, yeah, he didn't see, he
Mhm.
has evidence for it, but yeah, he
Right.
doesn't talk
He
about
did.
it, analyze it, show it as part of his findings. It's not there.
And it's in yours. And I think it's beautifully done. I wanted to ask you about your daughter in just a second. I wanted to see too, did you ever in this process of taking Bronfenbrenner's work and kind of making it your own, did you ever run across a feeling of risking circularity with his work and yours and kind of getting in this infinite loop? Or um, was your expansion of his work um, provide, how do I want to word this? I guess it was more around the production of your research. Did it provide surprises in unexpected ways, or did you find yourself finding ways to not kind of get into his circular pattern of just repeating the work he'd already done?
Yeah, no, it was very much my kind of own experience because it
Hmm.
is it I don't think that he had to deal in that time, or even if he were to come back now, the kind of sense of sexual harassment that I began to feel, right? And so, but coming to that
Hmm.
and being willing to talk about that, like I said, it took me about 6 years. It took me about 6 years to say, like, okay, this is happening to me. I'm feeling this, and how can I put this in a way that would be understandable for
Yeah.
other people? I was at a session earlier today, or it was yesterday, and there was a woman who talked about her court case for sexual harassment.
Hmm.
And I thought to myself, how difficult to bring forth all these experiences and convey them. And then she talks about the court system basically silencing her and a sense of like mockery and you're just like, yeah, you've ta and so I was, we deal with things in different ways, and mine was not to go to court, particularly in the Russian Federation, right? So, how do I deal with that and make myself okay that I'm feeling this and experiencing this?
Yeah.
And and then it was the strangest thing because a meme came through one of my social medias and it was a picture of Daniel Craig right beside a young Vladimir Putin. I was like, yeah, they do look alike. And that was like, what is it with James Bond? And that started it. And
Yeah.
then I ran into the article by Umberto Eco, who wrote this is the same story told again and again and again and again. And I used his stages of a model of the James Bond story to create that kind of what my teacher of dramaturg called the male structure, the Frere model of like there's a rising action, falling action, all that stuff, where
Mhm.
she argued like women can tend to write in this more circular kind of series of episodes, and there's a theme connecting them. And
Yeah.
so um, I was like, okay, then let me try and use this male structure to
Mhm.
show my experience within that male structure of writing.
Yes. And not only that male structure, but you're also across the continent, in a completely different cultural environment that way.
Yeah.
And you're working across two educational cultures that have very different ideas about the relationship between the individual and collective in your female body on top of that. How did that how did that contrast feel for you there? And how did you navigate these differences? And how did your body react? You talked about, preparing to make sure there seemed to be like a sense of safety of, wanting to make sure you and Olga were on the same page with co-teaching. You layer in pieces of the Watchers and the Gray Man and how you reacted in some ways. Walking, I think I remember a moment walking on the sidewalk and you had kind of a thought about how to react. There's a lot of physical emotion, not just with being a mom and a teacher, but you're navigating so many things as a woman. You had the Gray Man, you had the experience of talking with your daughter's teachers, the PE teacher. There was an observation you did there,
Hmm.
and teaching your 10th grade students. You talk about the importance of the active listening being crucial in these experiences. But how did you navigate the relationship between that individual and collective idea in all of this that you're experiencing this year?
Well, here's the thing, this idea, this theoretical idea of like the individual and the collective. A lot of times, I think one of the reasons I wound up really falling in love with autoethnography is there's sense of like alienation. Like we understand we're not fitting in with whatever this cultural construct or way of being is supposed to be. And so we feel like kind of this sense of alienation. And I wouldn't say it just happens in Russia. There's a lot of times in the United States where I'm just like, I don't get what all these other people are doing, and it's and I have to say, and like I show in that text, is in some ways that collective was a certain amount of like psychological and environmental safety
Yes.
in protecting me from things I may be being protected from, but don't know until those things are removed,
On you. Yeah, removed or upon you. Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
you're like, okay, maybe this was for the best, and I didn't know that, right? But that's where we get to these ideas also of like consent. Shouldn't, even if you're being provided a certain amount of security,
Hmm.
right? I should have the right to consent whether or not I even want that security,
Yeah.
I think, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because um this is when we're doing research, we need to tell people like I'm doing research here. And I had to have when I came in on the first page of my syllabus, I am an ethnographer. I do educational ethnography. I'm particularly interested in like the way people write and how writing has different genres and that some genres get valued more than others. And that ought to all be in like the front page of my syllabus when I went in to teach. And people knew I was coming to do a study. So because I was on a grant, I was on the Fulbright grant, so it's fairly prestigious, right? But um if there is I'm understudy in some way, and
Hmm.
that's the thing is if a security detail is there, then that in my mind would call for some kind of like consent to have that.
Mm.
Right? Here's the risks, here's the benefits, just like in research, right? Risks and benefits,
Mhm.
and put those out and let people know. But that happens at the national levels as well, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, our government needs to do this to secure you. And it's like, well, wait a minute. I
Yeah.
don't know that I necessarily agree with the way I'm being secured.
Yeah. And that was at the very beginning of your travels, these what these not restraints, but these structures are here to benefit you or help you or support you. And you're like, really? I'll decide that.
Can you tell?
Speaking of making decisions, one of the decisions that you made was to bring your daughter or to have your daughter, not bring your daughter in, but to have your daughter be at the cornerstone of your research.
Mhm.
I thought about this as I was rereading it again because I'd read it, and then we had our experience in January in person in Florida, and then now we're having our conversation, and um, just thinking about some of the logistics of how to go about research in an ethically mindful way, to offer dignity to those that you include in research or that you center in your research. And I know there were several folks that came in January talking about, and how do I weigh this? How do I carry the burden of maybe a parent or a professor, and I want to share my child's story or experience or infuse that in, but they're minors, and how do we do that, and how do we live with that, and what will this look like in 20 years for our kids? As you share in your autoethnographic approach, I can't even talk today. I'm going to start over. The autoethnographic approach aligns because you can study others as a primary focus, but it also provides an entry into your own world, as you share. Bringing your daughter into the narrative as a young American student navigating Russian language and culture, that created a second autoethnographic subject inside your own account and was the cornerstone of your study. How did you think about representing her experience ethically and accurately? And how did her presence change what the book became as an entry into your world?
Well, that's a complex question,
Would you like
Chris.
me to read it again?
Yeah, just the question part.
The question
Okay.
part. Yes. So, with your daughter, how did you think about representing her experience ethically and accurately? And how did her presence change what the book became as an entry to your world, a part of your world?
Okay. Um, so representing her ethically. My I did not write this book for so they say you have to have an audience, have an audience, have an audience for something. And I was like, I have to write it. I have to write it. I have to write it. So audience wasn't the first thought for me. It was all about I have to write this
Mhm.
because I love these people. I love the Ukrainian people. I love the Russian people and the mix of multiple people that are labeled with easy things like Russian and Ukrainian.
Right.
Right. And then it became even more imperative as, bombs began to fly. I'm like, why, where is the love? Like, I have this love and I need to give this. And this book is my love. And it includes my daughter and it includes the poetry that was given to my daughter. And so representing her ethically, um, was more so grounded in the sense of honesty. I want to be honest. Parenting, no person I know walked away from a midwife or out of a hospital and was given a handbook on how to do this, right? And I think I've learned to really value like mother writing or the momographies or
Mhm.
whatever. I haven't read a lot of them, but I've read autoethnography that deals with, women and being a parent and not having the handbook like who none of us have. And so I wanted to show with honesty who I am trying to figure out this role of mother. And I realized that she is a child. So ethically, one of the big things was letting her choose the curriculum
Mm,
because ultimately it's a comparative education book, right?
right.
I wanted to write because I'm an educator and I have to write about my discipline, which is education. And so to talk about the curriculum, I was like, she's going to choose it,
Hmm.
right? So she is the one who chose the pieces
Hmm.
that she would bring in. Now, as I began to write myself around those pieces, and I sometimes felt like, okay, like there was a point where she was very upset. She had a disagreement with her father, and she was very upset, and she was threatening to throw herself out of a window, right? And I'm like, oh my, what is going on? And I held her, and later I told her, I was like, I am writing right now about that time you tried to throw yourself out the window. Do you remember that when you got in a fight with your brother? She's like, no, I did that. I'm like, yes, you did that. She's like, and you wrote about that? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, okay, I guess that's fine.
And
Right.
she
So
said,
when
yeah,
there's,
yeah, I love it. That I was concerned about her for 2 seconds for sure, but I'm glad that you had that conversation with her.
so, in those places where I really thought like this may not be something, but the fact that she couldn't remember it. And that's the crazy thing I'm realizing as a parent is like you do all these wonderful things like go on trips and, have your kids blow bubbles, not because they're going to remember it, because you will.
Correct.
I mean, there's so little they actually remember. And it's shocking to me that you had this wonderful experience or this horrible experience and I did that? Yes, you did. Right?
With the writing with her with the poetry, how did you go about and this is more your realm than mine as far as like the linguistic and cultural worlds of what you were trying to illustrate or expose simultaneously. With her with the writing, how did you go about figuring out with the translation piece about what can then there's dialogue about this. She talks about some of her word choices, down to a word choice about what can cross over and what can't. And what was that collaboration like? Um, with the writing together and the closeness that may have provided you two.
Yeah, I think that was really profound and really powerful because that's when I really realized that, we talk a lot about not having kids translate. They should just know the gist and all that. But what was so powerful to me was the fact that um, she made profound decisions about particular words to use
Yes, she did.
and inform me as to why those choices. Like, children, mom, we can't get a job. And so this person is saying we're begging. We're not begging. Like we just can't have a job. We wouldn't beg if we could go have a job and get money. And so I think it's more like they're nagging. And I'm like, okay. And it was like a light went on. I'm like, this is a different perspective. This is a view that doesn't often get honored in things is what we consider kind of complex like translation and translation studies, but actually maybe we should do more of it. There's actually a lot of several researchers have talked about with older learners the importance of having them do translation acts
Mm,
and activities, but I haven't seen a lot about like why not kindergartners do it? I mean,
yes.
why not the smallest of children like explaining and justifying what they're doing? We might learn a lot from children if we were looking at those places where words just don't line up so easily.
Mhm. And they're still so honest
Yeah.
and still rooted in truth that it's so pure most of the time. And
Yeah.
I know we probably want to leave time for questions, but I wanted to kind of ask one more and leave it open to whatever I didn't get to that you want to make sure that people understand about your journey. But I wanted to think through. Often we sit in these spaces and we talk about the depth of research to carry on things. But as a if there are any people in the audience or that will see this that are kind of that at the beginning stages of how do I even tackle autoethnography? Where do I even begin with this? My thought was autoethnography is sometimes criticized for stopping at the level of the individual, for illuminating one life without producing transferable knowledge. Your book seems directly engaged with that challenge. What do you hope a reader, especially a young autoethnographer, just entering the field, takes from your work about what autoethnography can do?
Autoethnography can do anything. That's the power of it. You are determined. When I had this man, when I sent out the manuscript for review, one person came back, one of the reviews came back and said, you need to beef up the information about autoethnography itself. And so I enrolled in a certificate course with Tony.
Mhm.
And what I've come to realize is you I told him when I went to this class, I said, I cannot keep doing the 5-phase research article based on the 17th century Boyle model anymore, or I'm not going to be able to survive in the university. I have to write something else. And it seems to me that autoethnography is that space. And now that I actually have the book in print and can look at it, I think to myself, it can do anything. Like I was able to at times even I think this is a bit clunky and but I was able to achieve what I wanted to achieve, which was to look at one writer's earlier work through a later framework that they came up with.
Mhm.
That was that's how it, the impetus at the beginning. But then as I moved through the process and I had to explain why these are the choices I'm making as I write this,
Yeah.
I realized, wow, you can do anything with autoethnography. You just have to make that process clear, you
Clear.
know,
Yeah.
and that's what I really love about it and and encourage other people I meet like you ought to consider autoethnography for this
Yeah.
because you can do anything with it. You can in terms of you know the structure and the shape and what you conveying and I think it opens a vast, just vast possibilities that I think everyone should take advantage of at some point, even if they only, write one or two things in their entire lives through the form. I think it can do anything.
Yeah. Well, I just thank you so much for the privilege and the honor to get to read your work as you were developing it. It made me a better person, and I just was hooked from the beginning of each chapter with how you laid it out. And for content and an arena that I'm not familiar with, I was mesmerized. I couldn't put it down. And I love how, I mean, you had pop culture in there. You weaved so many different pieces in there, and I hope that others will pick this up and read just to see. It was just such a unique way and style and structure. And it had a little bit of everything in it. And you share about your family, your brother. There's a story in there about your brother. And so, as someone shared in the last session, our lives continue to go on. So some of that was going on with you as you were living this. And so I'm sure I didn't ask some questions that you want to share. So the floor is yours, or to whomever would like to share or ask any questions. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us today.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was a joy.
So it looks like Catherine has a question.
Yeah.
Catherine was just clapping hands and is very
Oh,
tired, so I don't, but thank you. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Ela, did you have a question or are you clapping
I
hands?
I was clapping, but I do have a question. So, all right. So I have a question that I'm trying to formulate, like a comment and a question. But my first question was, you mentioned Umberto Eco, one of my favorite writers and semioticians. So which article did you were you referring to? It's an article that he writes about James Bond.
Yeah, I've got the book here and I can give you the name. And it's actually, I found it online and I was fascinated that he'd written this. It's called Narrative Structures in Fleming. And
Oh,
it's part of
narrative
a book,
structures in Fleming. Yeah.
and it's part of a
Okay.
book called The Bond Affair.
Hmm.
And it was
So
written in 1966.
1960s. Yeah, I was just wondering. Yeah. 1960s. Right. So he probably is referring more to the writer, to Fleming, right? Not to the films.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
talk a lot.
yeah.
I had to spend quite a bit of time. It slowed me down in getting the book out because I had to research like why is Bond so popular? Like I can think of no other like spy assassin who is more like well known than this character. And it's fascinating because Fleming, once the films began to come out and he realized, oh, this is what the audience likes, he used that information to start changing books a bit, right? And his very first book, um, he was more psychological, and then Eco argues at the end of that book, he kills off the psychological element and it becomes very formulaic. And
Yeah,
and he just keeps
it's
putting these pieces in different ways together in different ways. And then I read a couple more. There's some places I like his one about what is it called, about Harlem, like his racism there. I couldn't even get through that book. I'm just like, okay, I'm done with this. I can't go any further in this. Um, but some of the other books I read, right? I was like, yeah, okay, I think Echo's totally right here. Like
mm,
this is very formulaic and to see the same, elements again and again and again, just moved into different places in different ways.
yeah, absolutely. The fundamental to the way series are created and serials is the
Mhm.
returning of the same pieces over and over and over again. So not only there, but in melodramatic serials, generally speaking, you can see that. But it's very early. I'm not familiar with this work, so that's very interesting. And I also, you mentioned Sarah Ahmed. I think there are a couple of Sarah Ahmeds, but
Mhm.
so could you tell us a little bit about what Sarah Ahmed has done? I know you mentioned in particular work that she is doing around women, and she says, families are central to women. So what was that work?
It's Queer Phenomenology is the name
Okay,
of the book. Queer
okay.
Phenomenology. And so um I wound up it was a suggested book to me. I had written a advocacy piece for more attention to queer students in school. And I was presenting at a conference and someone said, have you read Queer Phenomenology yet? And I was like, no. They're like, you really need to read Ahmed. And it was there that she said, she was talking about, she uses the table, it comes into being because I sit myself here and I begin to write. And now it's present because I'm here using this table, and family is like that for women in particular. And she, it was from that um, I became unashamed to write about family. That yes, this is important to me, and I'm not going to hide behind this, you know, artificial construct where I stand outside of the family and I am not affected by these people. They make me, right? Just as I make them in those relationships.
Good. No, I'm so glad that you mentioned, because it sounds like a very powerful work. And I was just hearing something that I think that you explain it now when you're talking about how you felt some shame around this, and that helped you get out of the shame. So that's super important. But I was wondering, the way you were referring to it sounded like essentializing, like women feel this way and men feel that way. And actually, a queer approach will completely undermine that. It completely will subvert that. So I was hearing you, and I'm like, I may not be a woman because that's not important to me.
Mhm.
I am sure that she questions that, and stays away from that essentializing. Do you know what I'm talking about? This binary men, women. I really do stand in the queer intersection between those two. I do
Well,
not. But from where you stand, it seems that it resonated as that, right?
Well, I have to tell you that Sarah Ahmed is also lesbian. And so her identity as lesbian informs that idea of woman, I think. But I don't necessarily know that uh any other queer person would identify themselves as lesbian, but she does. She talks explicitly about her partner. And I think if it sounds like I'm essentializing, that wasn't the intent. I was kind of, I think, revoicing some of what she is saying and her positioning as a lesbian.
Right. No, because I think because of the work that you're doing, and the importance of nature, right?
Yeah.
And different conceptualization of nature, it invites me. And I am speaking from outside. I'm not speaking as somebody who knows Ahmed. I know Echo. I do not know Ahmed. It's definitely missing in my reading. But it seems to me that actually what you're encountering is a multiplicity, right? Multivocal possibilities of relating to nature that break the binary.
Yeah.
That break the binary. That actually what I was thinking. It seems to me that probably we could be speaking about the feminine person, and the feminine person can be any of us in a way.
Yeah.
It is an aspect of us that hopefully we all embrace. So I wonder also if in the conceptualizing of nature there is a shift to queerness in terms of debunking the binary.
Yeah. And I would, and Ela, also, I would say I have moved farther toward that idea in writing this book, right? I mean, learning it's a process. Knowledge is this process, right? And that binary is very common in our species and are the way we've socially, culturally constructed all of this, right? So one of the things I try to move my students toward now, and this is past the book, having written the book, having looked at ecolinguists and things like that, is ecoculturalism, moving away from the social, where it's human-centric, it's anthropocentric. We have to begin to decentralize ourselves. Like we're so egocentric. And then, you look at some of the things in the newer handbook for autoethnography, and you have people talking about exactly this. How do we do that? How are those things written? Right. And so I think it's a very rich area of exploration.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. And you and I put together a panel last year on eco nature and eco culture, which precisely came from you, from understanding or being curious and wanting to see how the decentering may work from different latitudes. So that's what I had in my mind as well, that there is this background that you're exploring.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you asking questions, or Caitlin, you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question. When you're talking about perspectives on relationship to nature and sort of dominant culture, coming from the geology space, I'm very familiar with the idea of extraction of resources, but I would also say there is a fair amount, and I think it's interesting to see in the almost 30 years that I've been in geology, from being a student now to being a professional, the tent's getting bigger. And there is, because of climate science, the focus on resources has really gotten stretched, and sort of what that meant for that had a certain sort of impact on curriculum. And that sense has really changed, I think, in the last 25 plus years, because there are things that the way I see it is a lot of kind of identity crisis within geology. But that because it's sort of like, wait a second, these things that are sort of, this was the way we always did it. Like, yeah, no, that's not going to work anymore. But there are books on my list that I was curious if you have looked at. There are things I have not yet read, but it just made me think about sort of expanding conversations. One is called Wild Girls: How the Outdoors Shaped the Women Who Challenged a Nation. And then another one is called Black Earth Wisdom. And I think what strikes me so much about both of these books is that they are geology needs to start and thinking broadly. And so, I mean, I look at these things, and I mean, there's a lot of others, I'm sure, and some I'm aware of, but just that came to mind. But I guess it's sort of just a comment of, yes, I agree with you that issue of resources, and I'm enough of a geologist to say, well, we're all sitting here on computers. We're all using natural resources at the moment. So there is a complexity about how we use resources. The amount of minerals and things that are in the devices that we are currently looking at, the geologists those are extracted and we need them because we're doing this thing. But it's complex. And so I think that sort of the space is getting bigger. But as a geologist, I say, yes, we definitely need to acknowledge our extraction history. And there's a lot there. But I think it's also really interesting to see how that conversation is expanding. So anyway, it's just,
Yeah,
you and I can keep talking about this at other times, but
in academic literacy education, we talk about this trend toward the greening of the sciences, right? When I was in school, you would read a science book and there was nothing about like what are the limits to this constant extraction and resource. Where I think in the past 20 years, you don't tend to find a textbook that doesn't, at least at the end of the chapter, have a few paragraphs that are kind of the greening of the science, where the alternative is explained, right?
Yeah.
And dealt with. Yeah.
And you have also this kind of like, I'm sorry, Kellen.
No, go ahead.
At least in Latin America, Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, this proliferation of indigenous work, work directly with nature, but also academic work in rethinking, but in a way returning, you will, to the sacredness of the space we inhabit. And that decenteredness that was actually kind of there to start with.
Yeah.
So it's very exciting. That part is very exciting. And of course, it's related to imminent danger, more and more visible.
Yeah. And when I was writing this text and getting into the ecolinguist, I was like, wait, I know this because I took this Native American literature course when I was like in early master's program, and I wound up, pulling those writers out and bringing those into my text to kind of validate like this is what I'm seeing in the curriculum. And I think this is another rich area, is trying to find those kind of common ideas that exist in different cultures. We're all emerging from the same earth, right? Like, and what are the ways we've held these ideas sacred? I think in some cultures, like the indigenous, someone mentioned Kimmerer the other day. Her books are absolutely phenomenal and have made people realize that we have to find this way to merge the traditional Western science with the indigenous ways of knowing, because some of what Western science has been providing is very, very necessary if we're to extend the life of all species, right? And that can be highly informed by the people who are able to preserve those kind of indigenous ways of knowing nature and the earth. And if you haven't read Kimmerer, Robin Weld Kimmerer, any of her 3 books are amazing. She's a botanist in Potawatomi. Yeah. Chris, thank you so much for your time and preparing questions.
Oh, no, this is all you. I'm just happy to be here. Thank you for your work.